someone who has spent any length of formative years in the United States, then you have seen any of the movies, watched any of the TV shows, or listened to any music, or frankly had general conversations with people. You and I have developed a very individualistic way of looking at things. And so what we like to see and what we pay attention to is the single characters. We care about the development of these single characters. We want to know what's going on with these single characters, and we want to know their background, and we want to understand, we've got this kind of pop psychology. We want to know what makes them tick. And so it's really, really easy for us, and I brought this up before, to watch these movies and see, these giant creatures and the bad guys and whatever come attack the Avengers in New York and knock over, 800 or 900 buildings, and give no thought to the idea that there would have been people in those buildings. And so this isn't to make you feel bad about watching movies, because I really want to see the new Godzilla film, and that's just going to be the one destruction of cities everywhere. So that one's not a question of how many buildings are destroyed. That's a question of how many nations survive, that kind of deal. But so I want to again, as I think I brought that up in a recent sermon. I want to put that myopic tendency in our culture on display for a second, so that we can do our best to try to realize, okay, we're going to read this story, and I'm going to try to see everyone in the story. Okay, I'm going to try to see everyone in the story. It's going to be really hard to see everyone in the story. And what's worse is that if you, in your growing up, like me, went to good, the hearts were right churches who were super, super dialed in to the importance of doctrine, and what they really meant is not going outside what the seminary professor had to say. It'll be really easy to think this is nothing, or worse, if you did notice the issue before, to come up with the super easy, explain it away kind of deal, instead of really, really, really dialing in. Because I do believe that God has something to say to each one of us, and there may be someone in here who needs to hear the be set free of the main character other than Jesus in this story, but I imagine most of us are the other people. And that if we too quickly see the very evident chains of one, we won't see the chains of the other. And as we sang, and it was beautiful because Adam and I did not plan this at all, that we would sing and spend so much time singing about having our chains broken. I am super pumped because God wants to shatter chains, and the problem is that you and I tend to think of certain things as chains and not others. And I'm hoping that we will discover some chains that God wants to break. So, in Luke chapter 8, we're coming back to the Gospel of Luke. We spent some time hanging out in the Old Testament where all the fun stories are, and now we're back to where there's other fun stories, just not nearly as much action and adventure, a little more drama and dialogue. We're going to be in Luke chapter 8. We're going to start in verse 26. I'm going to be reading out the New Living Translation. If you're using a mobile device, you're looking for the letters NLT on the translation. Let me pray, and then we'll get a little context, and we'll dive right in. Father, give us eyes to see. Give us ears to hear. Give us hearts to understand. Jesus, you said that so often you spoke in parables in the latter part of your ministry to help distinguish between those who were really going to hear and those who wouldn't. Lord, make us people who want to hear you. I thank you that you don't refuse us, you don't deny us when we seek you. Thank you that your word is clear on that. That without faith it's impossible to please you. And then the instructions that if we would come to you, we must believe that you exist and that you reward those who seek you. So make our hearts all about seeking you. Really, this morning, dial us in to the frequencies in which you want to speak. And I thank you, Holy Spirit, that you have these sort of nuanced, different bits that you want to share with each one of us. And so tune us in to what you're doing. May we hear you. Lord, you've already rejoiced in our singing and spoken to us more than we might have realized. So help us to realize. Lord, help us to leave here different. Lord, I would love for us to all leave here with all of our chains broken. At the very least, may one more come off. Thank you. Speak to us as only you can. In Christ's name. Amen. So Luke 8 is part of this section of the Gospel of Luke that's been kind of discussing some of the background of Jesus' ministry. It has some sections on teaching. And then there's going to be this point where Jesus is kind of out of nowhere going to declare that they need to go to the other side from where they are because he's got some work to do over there. He's a little bit cagey about it, and there's plenty of debate as to what exactly was going on. In fact, the story I'm about to read to you, there's a sort of undercurrent battle among scholars. Some who think that Jesus went and attempted to expand his ministry and failed miserably, and that this story is an example of that. And then there are others that say, well, Jesus actually went very specifically for this particular incident. I'm of the mind that Jesus went for this specific incident. And not because I'm afraid of the failure piece. Like, part of Jesus' ministry is to fail. That's the one where people are like, wait, what? Did he just say what I thought he said? And yes, I did. If you'd like to talk about that later, we absolutely can. There are many times that God will set things up in order to help people see their weaknesses and their failure. In fact, the Apostle Paul discusses that the entire adoption of the law was purely to help people know you can't pull it off. So, in that sense of failure, yeah. And so, I'm not sure. Jesus doesn't really talk like that would be the case. And again, you see Jesus is as much as he cares about the larger group of folks, Jesus is always very concerned about individuals, always, which is a beautiful thing. You don't worship a God that sees you as a number. He's not like punching your ticket to get you at this wedding feast at the end because he just wants a huge crowd for his event. That's not who God is. It turns out there will be, and a huge crowd from every tribe, language, and tongue, which is going to be really fun. But Jesus cares about each of us individually, and we see that in this story, but it's not just individuals he cares about. So, again, get your eyes, get ready, try to see everyone in this story if you possibly can, all right? Luke chapter 8, starting verse 26, Jesus has come, he's calmed the storm on their way over, which is just blowing his disciples' minds, and this is where we pick up. So they arrived in the region of the Gerasenes, across the lake from Galilee. Okay, we got to stop there. Sorry, I know. You're like, Joe must do this on purpose. It's like every time, one verse, and then we got to stop and have 20 minutes of introduction, and then go on. No, so this particular passage of Scripture has caused so much trouble for scholars, and this goes all the way back to about the 2nd and 3rd century, of people that have said, okay, there is either a spelling issue here, or there is we don't really understand what's going on because this Gerasenes area, they say, is not really quite in the area where they're talking about. It is across the lake from Galilee, but it's weird they even say it as Galilee. And so anyway, it's resulted in tons of debate about where exactly this area is. Because what you find out is that when you're a Bible scholar, you have nothing more to do with your life than to sit there and pick apart words like just crazy. And to argue the geographies of things, and there's lots of different explanations. I'll say this, it doesn't change the nature of the story. There's not like a hidden contradiction there. It's not one of the passages of Scripture, and there are a couple of them, where you kind of go, oh, if it goes this way or if it goes that way. But the bottom line, though, is that the use of this particular term is a little bit confusing because the region is sort of in the direction of what they're talking about, but it's not precisely in the place where they are. What you got to understand about the writers of the Bible is this is not the evening news, okay? And frankly, you could argue some of the evening news isn't even that accurate anyway. But it's not the evening news. The idea of, we're not writing police reports. We're not sitting here going, at 2:16 p.m., Jesus landed, put his left foot on the dirt, and then et cetera, et cetera. The reality is that people in this time did not care about those details. They were like the super broad stroke folks. I recently had an interaction with one of the VPs where I work, and I was having to explain something, and he was like, Joe, just give me the broad strokes. And it was a bummer, because I was like, no, because if I broad stroke this, you'll think that the Gerasenes is here, when it's actually kind of over here. So there are times where you really can't broad stroke things and really get precise, but the Bible is full of broad stroking, okay? So it's like, here's this kind of general area, and I just want to share that with you, because if you go back and do some digging on your own, which I encourage you to do, challenge the things that I said, go back and look, you will find folks that will argue vehemently about the exact geography of this. And I would say you're sort of missing the point. But one of the reasons why this is key is because of how it affects one of the characters, plural, in this story. Because people will argue, point now is we're going to stick a pin in that, and we're going to keep going and get into this story. Really good. Okay, as Jesus was climbing out of the boat, was it his left foot or right foot? We don't know. A man who was possessed by demons came out to meet him. For a long time, he had been homeless and naked, living in the tombs outside the town. As soon as he saw Jesus, he shrieked and fell down in front of him. Then he screamed, "Why are you interfering with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High? Please, I beg you, don't torture me." For Jesus had already commanded the evil spirit to come out of him. The spirit had often taken control of the man. Even when he was placed under guard and put in chains and shackles, he simply broke them and rushed out into the wilderness completely under the demon's power. Jesus demanded, "What is your name?" "Legion," he replied, for he was filled with many demons. The demons kept begging Jesus not to send them into the bottomless pit. There happened to be a large herd of pigs feeding on the hillside nearby, and the demons begged Jesus, to let them enter into the pigs. So Jesus gave them permission. Then the demons came out of the man and entered the pigs, and the entire herd plunged down the steep hillside into the lake and drowned. Mark tells us it was about 2,000 pigs. When the herdsmen saw it, they fled to the nearby town and the surrounding countryside, spreading the news as they ran. People rushed out to see what had happened. A crowd soon gathered around Jesus, and they saw the man who had been freed from the demons. He was sitting at Jesus' feet, fully clothed and perfectly sane, and they were all afraid. Then those who had seen what had happened told the others how the demon-possessed man had been healed, and all the people in the region of the Gerasenes begged Jesus to go away and leave them alone, for a great wave of fear swept over them. So Jesus returned to the boat and left, crossing back to the other side of the lake. The man who had been freed from the demons begged to go with him, but Jesus sent him home, saying, "No, go back to your family and tell them everything God has done for you." So he went all through the town, proclaiming the great things Jesus had done for him. And that's the word of God. All right, so great sermon potential. I mean, this one's an easy one. This thing preaches itself. You know, Jesus comes from this distance, and he comes in, and this person who has been impacted by demons, and not just demons, the demons have chosen a band name. I mean, that's how many there are in this. This is this giant orchestra, this parade of marching band demons. No, not trying to bug you there, Alex. And you know, coming through, and there's so many of them that they can't give their name. They choose one, and they choose the name Legion. And that word means something very, very specific to the people of the time. That's what the Romans called their big armies. They would have anywhere from 5,000 to 6,000 foot soldiers, not to mention the possibility of cavalry and siege engines and any other number of things. Like, one legion could take over a country. And so it's not just how many soldiers are there, but how powerful they are. This is like the most powerful military force the world has ever seen, and up until about the 18th century or so, the most powerful force anyone will see. In fact, the Romans were so smart and so effective with war, they had invented things that we forgot about until we get into the late Middle Ages and back into the Enlightenment. The Romans were this crazy superior force, and if they went toe-to-toe with folks, those folks were going down. The only way to beat Romans at their game was to take a long, multi-decade period of time and just keep doing the guerrilla stuff until the Romans decided they were tired and they went home. The reality is that after the Hannibal invasion, really early on, prior to the empire, the Romans never lost a battle. So this statement of legion is like shocking, and in fact, probably Jesus' disciples would have heard that and been like, language they would have needed to ask his forgiveness for later. So here's this guy, and it's legion, and then we get his backstory, which, he's the guy who has so many chains on him, he breaks his own. Because he got the demons on him, and he becomes like this super powerful thing, and he's fearsome, and he lives among the gravestones, so he's scary, all this stuff, and sure enough, and then Jesus shows up, and instantly this powerful Romanesque force of demons are already trying to get terms with Jesus, already offering their terms of surrender. And it's great, and this is true, by the way, that Jesus is that powerful. And there is nothing that could have seized us that he cannot defeat just with his own presence. Now, if you're like me, you're probably going, so why won't it? But the thing is, he can. And he often does. And so God wants to set you free. And just you might sit there thinking, I have so many demons, I could never be set free. And I'm going to tell you that it doesn't matter how many demons, because Jesus can call them out. And it's beautiful, and it's wonderful, and it's a great story. And then I tell you how much I need you to give afterwards, and then we all go have lunch. And you get to feel good about the fact that Jesus wants to set you free of your demons, and apparently give you clothes, and rest. And, he won't let you go with him, but, you'll be fine. And that's sort of true. And it's good. But it misses a really important detail that's in this story. And unfortunately, we're going to have to unpack it. And if you've already been, like me, exposed to a particular line of thinking, we're going to have to unpack that line of thinking in order to get to this other piece, in order to discover the breadth of God's capacity for breaking chains. And the reality that one character in this story gets the miraculous, chain-breaking, life-healing, and now everything's calm and cool version of Jesus' miracle of breaking chains. And a whole group gets something a little bit different, and a lot more painful, and reacts very differently. And the question really is, who are we going to be? Not according to what Jesus does for us, but according to our reaction to him. So in the midst of this story, there's a little more backstory. So this part of the country, this Gerasenes, Gadarenes, whichever term you want to use, is ruled by a set of cities known as the 10 cities, or the 10 towns. They were called the Decapolis. The Decapolis was just this Greek and then eventually Latinized term for the 10. And the polis meaning city, so Deca 10, polis city. And so these 10 cities were very, very unique in that for a long time during the conquests of the Babylonians, and then the conquest of the Persians, and then eventually when Alexander the Great comes in and sweeps this whole area, this area, along with the whole of what we would have called, modern-day Israel, constantly keeps changing hands as these battles go on. And then after Alexander the Great dies, he has 4 generals, and they take different portions of his empire. And then there's 2 that kind of become the real strong ones, and their families fight each other for generations. And they're known as the Seleucids and the Ptolemies. And you got to have a P in front of that T if you're going to go look that up online. So these families, they battle each other back and forth. And what's interesting is that Daniel, of the book of Daniel, a significant portion of his prophecies actually has to do with the nature of these battles between the Seleucids and the Ptolemies. Fascinating stuff that you probably never thought of before. But it's just, and the way he plays that out, and the way he can tie that into history, and even the guy, the big evil kind of precursor of Antichrist, Antiochus Epiphanes the fourth, who comes in and invades the temple and sacrifices a pig on the altar, which is this a huge no-no. Jewish folks do not do pigs. The Bible has been very explicit. There are unclean animals and there are clean animals. You can eat and sacrifice the clean animals. Unclean animals you're not even supposed to touch. You drive them out of your presence. And it turns out that pigs are one of these things. So anyway, in all of these battles and whatnot, finally Rome comes in to kind of sweep in to take over for this resurgent Jewish attempt at reestablishing sovereignty, this kingship. I can't think of their name all of a sudden. They have the books, Maccabees, that's what it is. So the Maccabees are these like kind of trying to restore the Davidic kingdom. They're not successful in it. That is where the Hanukkah story comes from. So anyway, you've got, but in the midst of all of these changes and the exiles coming back from Babylon and Persia and all of this, what you'll find is that the area that used to be all of where the tribes of Israel were is now being populated by different kinds of people groups. And as these last Roman battles come, Mark Antony versus Octavian. Octavian becomes Caesar Augustus, who is the adopted son of Julius Caesar. Okay, so they, on all of these battles, something happened, and I apologize. I didn't go back to read the very, very precise piece. This is more of like knowing I'm broad stroking, as it were. And so, but this area, this Decapolis, these 10 cities, were one of the few that sided with the right team when Octavian had to come back in and sweep and get his stuff back from Mark Antony. Which is the Mark Antony, Cleopatra, they commit suicide. Yeah, that actually happened. And it's because Caesar Augustus is closing in on them. And how does he get there? He goes through Israel. So, the 10 cities end up being loyal to the emperor, and so they receive a special dispensation in that they largely rule themselves. All the other areas come under different types of Roman control, but they realize, hey, the Decapolis are good people, they're good to the empire, so we're going to let them kind of run their thing. There were different cities throughout the Roman Empire that, while they were loyal to Rome, would not have been considered fully and completely Rome. In fact, if I remember correctly, I think it's Philippi is one of those cities, where that's where the whole, or maybe it might be Ephesus, where there's the big, people are freaking out, they're starting a riot over Paul being there, and it says that the proconsul gets up and he goes, guys, stop with the rioting or Rome's going to show up. So, this whole, so Decapolis has this special treatment, and so within the Decapolis is this interesting sort of diverse groups of people that are there. Some are Jewish, but a great many of them are not. And so, understand that Decapolis kind of controls their region and exerts their influence over this part of Galilee. Scholars have often argued that when Jesus goes to this part of Galilee, he's not going to see Jewish folks, he's going to see Gentiles. And the big explanation for this is because the 10 cities are kind of, they're a couple days away, but they might exert some authority over here. And then the question becomes, well, and because there's this giant herd of pigs. And as everyone who's ever gone to seminary knows, Jewish folks at that time never mess with pigs. And so, this must be a Gentile region. And so for the longest time, people talk about, can Jesus cast them into the pigs, and then the pigs, they rush into the water, and then we kind of gloss over because, Jesus has set free the demoniac, and that's what we want, and so we're good to go. And it's like, no one, except for everyone who doesn't follow Jesus, who reads this story, looks at that going, I'm sorry, Jesus did what to free this guy? He did what? He destroyed? And we're not just talking like a little bit of livelihood. Mark clarifies the number. 2,000 hogs completely destroyed. Not Jesus contacts the butcher real quick and says, hey, I got to put these demons somewhere. It's not your fault. You're just a bunch of Gentiles. So, but if you could just line them up, because they're going to go bananas, and you need to sell all this bacon as quick as you can. Just make sure they don't eat the brain, because that's where the demons. There's this whole section of stuff in it, and the reality is that the story only really makes sense if we, again, broad stroke it, and then if we just kind of choose to forget and only just go ahead and see ourselves as the guy who's got a zillion demons inside and Jesus sets us free, and yay, and who cares about what happened to everybody else? And the problem is, you really can't do that with this story, and neither would anyone who would have read the story seen it that way. But see, the thing is, and this gets lost on us, is that there's actually two miracles that happen, two different reactions, and we've got to come face to face with both. Because I think that there are examples in our own lives where God has operated in both ways. And you go, wait, what are the two miracles? The first miracle is that the guy gets set free, and then the second miracle is all the pigs go kill themselves and ruin people's livelihoods? And the answer is yes. That is. But here's why. This argument that Jesus is dealing with in a Gentile area with Gentile herdsmen running their Gentile farms doesn't work for a couple of reasons. First one is this. Jesus is surrounded in his time, particularly by Romans, but by Gentiles who are eating food they shouldn't eat, practicing behavior they shouldn't practice. He never gives them a hard time about it. Never. He never walks, there's never, and he has opportunities for it, by the way. He has plenty of opportunities. There's an incident with a Roman centurion. And in fact, even the phrasing of what's going on in that story suggests the possibility that Jesus could have brought some correction to a situation, and Jesus doesn't. So, this idea that, like, Jesus is, he's got, like, this sort of vendetta, and he's going to deal with these Gentiles. There's just nothing in that. And in fact, it gets worse. The Apostle Paul talks about how the eating stuff doesn't matter, but it's not even just the Apostle Paul. Even Mark brings it up. Mark brings up that Jesus taught his disciples that the eating laws aren't required anymore because the worship is changing. In fact, the whole reason for the unclean animals had nothing to do with, I've heard people say this before, the unclean animals, they ate unhealthy, and so the clean animals eat perfectly healthy, and all I have to say to that is goats. And then we're done. Goats are a clean animal. Goats are I have a friend who raises goats. Disgusting creatures. They're cute when they're babies, and they do good stuff. And the milk's wonderful, makes great cheese. So oftentimes there is this, because the unclean stuff wasn't good for you, and the clean stuff is good for you. And sure enough, apparently, supposedly someone found a virus in pork that you can't cook out or whatever. And I'm like, yeah, it makes it delicious. So I'm grateful for my Gentile pork eating self. And if you've ever had bacon, you know the Lord ordained that one. So this idea of it has to do with that and the different reasons. The bottom line is that God sets these rules for Israel, and he tells you exactly why he's doing it right at the beginning. So whenever people try to debate why it was that God did or didn't do this with the unclean animals, he simply says, I am trying to set you apart and make you different than the rest of the world. And that difference is so that people pay attention and go, oh, what's different? And then they get to talk to them about the one true God. I mean, actually, we carry that tradition over as Christians, where we're supposed to be set apart. We're supposed to be different. And people will get all big on the, that's right. You don't ever curse, and you don't go to movies, and you don't, drink alcohol. And it's like, oh, no, trust me. Nobody notices that one. The difference we're supposed to be is don't be a jerk at work. Don't take revenge on folks. Serve other people who are going to sabotage you. That's the stuff that people pay attention to that's different. So the whole clean, unclean thing, Jesus is already settling with his disciples, and then there's going to be significant teaching about it for under Paul about, hey, the food stuff doesn't matter. So Jesus doesn't have this vendetta here. So what in the heck is going on? Why in the world would Jesus engage in the willful destruction of other people's property? And of course, what gets brought up is this. People are worth more than animals. Well, that's true. And in fact, Jesus even says at one point, God is concerned about a lowly sparrow and knows what happens to the sparrow, knows when the sparrow rises and falls. These things that we wouldn't notice. And then Jesus points out, you can buy them for half a coin. And people, you are worth far more than these sparrows that God is attentive towards. So it's not that. And Jesus is there, and it's interesting because it's like they have a very short exchange and the people want Jesus to leave. Is there something that we're missing in this story that helps explain why it is that Jesus would be willing to destroy the pigs? Now, I've heard one other argument back that I think really misses the point, which is that, well, Jesus doesn't willfully send the demons to the pigs. The demons suggest the pigs. Jesus just allows it. So it's the demons that destroy the pigs and not Jesus. Now, it would probably be good for all of us to go ahead and have a reality check embracing of the fact that if you and I have the ability to stop something and we allow it, what do the police charge us with? Being complicit, being an accomplice. So I always get really freaked out whenever people start getting really big on God would never do that, or God didn't do that. And I'm like, he could have stopped it and he didn't. That's a tough one. See, I actually think this story does a fantastic job answering a really hard question we don't always know how to answer about God's miraculous work. Yeah, we see the demon-possessed guy being released, and we want to be that one. But we're not seeing this other miracle that has also occurred. So let's come back. I told you to put a pin on the name, the Gerasenes. So it turns out that this term, often used for Gerasenes, might be better given up and another word used for it, and that word is Gadarenes. The Gadarenes was another name for the area. It was kind of an older and an earlier name, and so you've got this Gerasene name. But if we just go ahead and take the new name and we say Gadarenes, we might come up with something. So, for example, once upon a time, Beth and I worked at a church. And that church it no longer has its name and is no longer in the town that it was in. Now, that's a weird thing to say. We worked at this church, no longer has its name, no longer the town that it was in. We worked at a church that was in Castle Rock, and the name of the church was Castle Pines Community Church. And we were there for like 9 years, and cool ministry. God did some amazing stuff while we were there. And if you went to look for Castle Pines Community Church in the town of Castle Rock, you would not be able to find it. And so, if you did a very cursory, superficial look at my resume, you would probably think I was making it up. First of all, there never was a church in Castle Pines. There never was a church named Castle Pines in Castle Rock. And they would say, now, there is a town called Castle Pines North, and there are some churches there, but Joe, we think that you've made this up, and clearly you are a person who did not know that area, and so that's why you wrote what you wrote. Well, let me give you a little bit of trivia, and this will help explain why maybe it'd be better to use the term Gadarenes instead of Gerasenes. And in fact, I think it's Matthew that uses the older name. And that is true. You cannot find Castle Pines Community Church in Castle Rock. But if you were to go back in time, about 10, 15 years, then you might have been there with me when I sat there at our church at Buffalo Ridge Elementary School when the newly formed, newly incorporated city of Castle Pines North was formed out of a section that used to be considered Castle Rock. And then we go several years after Beth and I had been there and enjoyed our time, and only to discover that there is this church called the Foundry Church. It turns out that if you check the Foundry's founding documents, you will discover that the Foundry used to be known as Castle Pines Community Church. So I'm telling you the truth within the context of the timeline of when I was there and what had happened. The Gerasenes term, the area used to be known as the Gadarenes. And what's interesting about that term is that it turns out that among the 12 tribes of Israel, and if I were to make you pick out what are the names of the 12 tribes of Israel, you know, there's most of you would probably be like Judah, I think something about the Levites, and then I think Peter, Paul, George, there we go, you know. And I don't blame you. And guess what? You don't need to know the tribes of Israel to you know, be right with God. You don't. I encourage you to, because it'll help you pick up on some of these things. But here are some of the names of Jacob's sons. Firstborn was a guy named Reuben, kind of ruined his status. And then the next one was Simeon. He ruined his status too with something. And Simeon, I think, is the one that Joseph put in jail for a time in the Joseph story. Go back, read Genesis. After Reuben, Simeon, then you got Levi. I had to memorize this stuff for once when I was a kid, so the Bible club. I'm glad they don't do that anymore. But so we've got Levi, and that's the tribe that becomes the priestly tribe, which was not God's original plan. We'll talk about that some other time, but they're the only ones that show allegiance during the golden calf incident, so they all get the priesthood. And then after that is this guy named Judah. Judah ends up kind of being the leader of the family, even though he is a horrible person. So then after Judah, let's see, that's the end of that for a while, and then Rachel gives her maidservant over, and she has a couple of kids, and I can't remember the order from there. But you've got names like Issachar and Zebulun, and you got Joseph and Benjamin. They have one sister, and Dinah. She doesn't get a tribe, poor thing. But it turns out that there is a name of one of Jacob's sons, and his name is Gad. What a strange name. My mom likes to be like, Egad, you know, that kind of deal, instead of using God's name in vain. So I'm like, yep, just change one of those vowels that we got there. That's okay, I just changed the last two letters, you know, and supposedly I'm not using his name in vain either. So you've got Gad, and if you look at a map that kind of plays out the division of the land according to Moses and Joshua, what you find is that the tribe of Gad is maybe about, their territory is about a day, maybe two, journey from the area where Jesus lands. Well, so what does that mean? Well, what we come to find out, reading through the boring Old Testament, is that the tribes of Israel are given their allotted lands, but then they decide that they don't like their allotted lands, and so some of them move around. And they end up kind of switching places and moving territory. And so Judah kind of keeps its own because it's got a big one, and Ephraim keeps theirs, so they got a big one. And Manasseh keeps theirs because nobody wants theirs. And so, but everyone else is kind of like stirring the pot and moving around, and the tribes move around, small family groups will move around. Sure enough, many of the tribe of Gad move north. And they settle near a region of this lake, Gennesaret, as it's called, or, as we know it, the Sea of Galilee. Now, you know, there's different stuff. I'm going to kind of speed up the fast forward this, but the bottom line is this. The area where Jesus lands is not run by Gentile folks. Now, again, I always try to admit this when we're running into this territory. I am definitely in the minority opinion. But I'm in the minority opinion not because everyone has done their due diligence, but because there are some arguments that are born out of some writings done in the 3rd and 4th century where people are complaining about, I don't know, that we're trying to get the precise exact location where it could be this like strip of land. And it's like, guys, you're really, really missing the point. More importantly is this. Jesus says something that is super shocking that nobody likes to preach on. And it's found in Matthew 15. There's this incident where he goes and he takes a vacation from his ministry. And he goes into the area of Tyre and Sidon. And he's relaxing at the house of somebody's friend, and this lady comes in saying, hey, I need a miracle for my kid. And Jesus, as we know him and love him, goes, okay, and does the miracle and everything's fine, right? No. Maybe you do recall this sort of obscure story where the lady asks for a miracle and Jesus responds with, my ministry is to the lost sheep of Israel. And it's not fair for me to throw the food of the kids to the dogs. People are like, Jesus said what? And people get really big on this one. In fact, I preached this on this story at a church and received a 15-minute post-clarification by one of the staff in front of the rest of the congregation about how I had misunderstood the Greek diminutive. I wanted to point out they were reading from the Amplified Bible, which is a mistake. Because you can't always tell which of the things that is the text and which are the explanation things that the scholars are adding to try to clarify it. And sure enough, Jesus does use a term that can be used in the diminutive, and certainly that's what he means. And he sets this up perfectly because he's trying to teach his disciples to understand, hey, your racist attitude about all the Gentiles needs to stop. But sure enough, he throws that down, and the lady makes this really humble comment where she goes, yeah, but even the dogs get to eat what falls off the table. And Jesus goes, excellent answer, you're right, and your daughter's healed. It's actually one of the few miracles where Jesus goes ahead and pronounces the healing from where he is, and the person then has to go back and see it. What you'll also notice is the other time he does that happens to be twice, and both of the times are with Gentiles. But what gets lost is that Jesus' purpose in this section of his ministry is not to run around to the rest of the Gentiles and let them know the truth and introduce them to stuff. In fact, in John, it talks about how right before he's about to get executed, a bunch of Greek Jews, so they're not Jewish in ethnicity, they're actually Greek in ethnicity, but they're Jewish in their beliefs, come and say, hey, we'd like to visit with Jesus. And Jesus declines them. Yes, that's not the Jesus I remember. Jesus does things in particular orders. That's a good thing to remember. Jesus isn't rejecting people. Jesus has come for a very specific mission, and he's there to fulfill the mission. And the minute he fulfills his mission, which is to die on the cross and come back to life, now all of a sudden it's spreading out like crazy. But so the thing, and this is really important, Jesus says very clearly in that story, a story that takes place after this story that we've read, I have not come for the Gentiles. Not yet. I am here for the lost sheep of Israel. I am here for the people of Israel. In fact, there's an archaeologist, kind of a pop archaeologist, but a very, very creative thinker. I'm not sure that he's a full-on follower of Jesus, but he's one that's willing to kind of look at these texts and does a hilarious job narrating them too. In fact, just did a film with James Cameron about the Exodus, which is just fantastic. James Cameron, the Titanic guy, he had Avatar and all that stuff, so it's like, Christian Avatar. But so he actually challenges this whole story and says that you can look at the clues, and it actually isn't even that Jesus is crossing the Sea of Galilee. He might be going through the Mediterranean and tracing the path of Jonah's mistake, which is just, we're not going to get into that, but it's just very interesting. The point being that there is a way to miss all of these important details, that they all speak to this one area, because again, like I've argued before, be really careful about getting your lesson from 3 verses. Because it'd be really easy to go, why is Jesus destroying Gentile pigs? He's not. Do you know whose pigs Jesus has just destroyed? Jewish people. I realize people will be like, well, it doesn't say Gentile in there. I'm like, I know. See, the Bible does this thing, and we know this to be true because it's written by people, where it will not clarify the people that are being, that are in the story when it's already given you the other details that you need and doesn't need to make a clarification. And all this time, anytime there's a discussion about a Gentile, every single time, either a direct description of this was a Gentile or an indirect description, this was a Roman soldier, Roman proconsul, something like that, is given. And here, nothing. The people running the pigs. Oh, and I get it. You got the Decapolis, it's all the way over there, so there's probably a bunch of Gentile folks living there. What you've got is the story of Jewish folks who know the law, know that at this time, and not knowing who Jesus is and what he's going to do, knowing that raising pigs makes them unworthy of worshiping God, which means they are separated from God because of their livelihood. Jesus gets rid of their pigs. This is really, really an important detail to understand. Because it's too easy for us to look at this story From our American subcultural view, always wanting to be about the hero, we want to know who the Luke Skywalker is, who the Captain America is. Okay, I guess we can do a duo, who Iron Man is. Like, we want to know the individual, we see the individual, we put ourselves in the place of the individual, and the reality is this: you and I need to ask this question: what pigs are we keeping around that we think make our lives better? That we know that God has told repeatedly and has made clear in His Word, do not let that be a part of your life, and yet we keep it because it benefits us in some way. The people raising these pigs have a massive audience of folks who aren't bound by the same rules, and so can eat bacon all they want and probably enjoy it. But the problem is, it's not okay for them because of who they are, because of what their commitment is. And so Jesus sets free two different kinds of people. People who can't help it, and people who should know better. So what happens? The reactions. The herdsmen rush off to the area. They bring people back, say what has happened. And we see the two different reactions in Scripture, right? The one who has been tormented by this Roman army size of demons is saying, Jesus, I want to go with you. And Jesus is saying, no, I want you to go and tell people the good news. But what's interesting is that that's not the first reaction that happens. The first reaction that we saw is the people come, they realize the pigs are dead, they see that this dude has been healed, and what do they say? Wow, Jesus, if you can change his life, if you can set us free, come, teach us more, set us even further free. Is that the reaction? No. And see, that's the thing. That's the thing that I think happens more often than we want to admit. It's that Jesus wants to set us free from any number of demons that we mistake for pigs. Hear that again. Jesus wants to set us free from any number of demons that we mistake for pigs. And why is that a big deal? Here's why. The demons, if you will, let's go metaphorical for a second, we know those are evil and messed up. They terrorize us, they drive us from our families, they lead us to homelessness, they destroy us, they give us weird superpowers, if it's this room, and whatever else, like these, and we know those are demons. And we know that we want God to free us from the demons. The problem is, there's a whole herd of pigs in our lives. They don't control us. They actually help us in certain ways. They make us cool with other people. They allow for exchange with other people. Right? This makes me okay if I take a stand against drunkenness. If I'm like, you think you might be drinking too much, I don't think it's a good idea. They kind of do. Oh boy, I better just join them. Because if I don't look like them. But that's not a demon, right? Too much to drink, just a little too much, just a little too much. Not too much, just a little bit too much. Well, I know that's not good for me, because I'm not going to drive. But I'm not like raging drunk, so all of a sudden it's not a demon anymore. Now it's just a pig. Oh yeah, it's smelly, it's stinky, and I know that I'm not supposed to do that, but that's just a pig. And actually, this pig allows me to have relationship and interaction and all this other stuff. Yeah, I'm not like cheating on my spouse, with an actual person, but, pornography, it's like, it's not, just whatever, I know it's not good, but it's not that, so, it's not a demon that's going to destroy everything, but it's just a pig. Go down the list. I'm so, I'm not selfish with my money, I give to the church now and then, what I got. I help poor folks or whatever, but, man, I'm just so tired of my walls. I need to spend thousands of dollars. Could that be a pig? I know, I just went Douglas County. I'm like, go ahead and crucify me later. Just know my blood doesn't forgive your sins. Jesus does. Here's the deal. What are the pigs? What are the pigs? What's worse is this. You and I tend to not just have like a pig. We tend to have a whole herd of pigs. My question is, how excited would you be if Jesus came in and swept away those pigs? See, that's the deal, and that's where we got to kind of close here. It's gone longer than I anticipated. But I want to challenge you in your response. Is your response going to be like the townsfolk who are so mad at Jesus for coming in and swiping away these things that get in his way? Or is it going to be like the guy who's set free and says, Jesus, I want to come with you? And here's what's interesting about Jesus. Even though Jesus gets rejected by the people, and I'll leave it on this note, even though Jesus gets rejected by the people, right? And normally when Jesus is walking around and someone wants to follow him, Jesus is like, come follow me. He'll challenge him, but generally speaking, what is Jesus' response to this guy? Go to your town, to your family, and tell them the good that God has done. You know what's crazy? The town came out to see it already. The town already rejected Jesus. And what's Jesus' response to them? Okay, well then I'll send you someone else to hear. Jesus is awesome. Jesus loves us. Jesus will do whatever it takes to save us. He'll set us free from the demons in our lives. He'll send people to come speak to us even though we rejected him. You know what else he'll do? Destroy anything and everything that gets in his way. That's how much he loves us. I can't think of a really good transition to communion, so we're just going to go for it. If you're newer or new, we do communion with the dipping style, something called intinction. We've got a gluten-free option and a juice option. The gluten-free and the juice should be on the left at the side. But come and realize just, if I may for a second, point out the extreme nature of God. A God who sent his Son to die on the cross, because that was the only way we could be saved. A God who crossed a lake or a sea or whatever, just for one guy. It might have been two, but just for a small one or two guys who were possessed by demons and needed to be set free. Knowing that the rest of it was not going to work out, so to speak. A God who saw those Jewish herdsmen separated from God by their herd of pigs. A God who will do miracles, wonders, whatever it takes to reach us. But then a God who does not force our response to him. A God will do whatever it takes, but then waits for us to say whether we receive it or not. So, come and celebrate this God who gave his life, gave up everything to save us. It would help you and I give up everything if that's what it takes for us to be saved. Christ's body, Christ's blood, we do this to remember him. Come on. My child, don't make light of the Lord's discipline, and don't give up when he corrects you. For the Lord disciplines those he loves, and he punishes each one he accepts as his child. As you endure this divine discipline, remember that God is treating you as his own children. Whoever heard of a child that is never disciplined by its father? Paul wasn't around very hard time. If God doesn't discipline you as he does all his children, it means you're illegitimate and not really his children at all. I think that something I've talked to my kids a lot when they were younger. One of them asked me one time why I was punishing them for something that a whole bunch of other kids had been doing also. It was like at the rec center or something. And I said, they're not my kids. They're not my kids. And it's not simply that I don't have authority to do so. Because actually, if they were doing something super dangerous, the culture would expect me to intervene. Fundamentally, I don't care what happens to them the way that I care what happens to mine. Again, another tough one. Like, what? Our culture needs to grow up a little. But that's true. And so, as you and I are asking God to do work in our lives, understand sometimes it's going to be the miracle that clothes you, and you're able to sit quietly, sanely at his feet. But sometimes the miracles are going to be the destruction of things, of relationships, or of opportunities, or whatever, that are no longer right for us. And the real question is not, how is God going to work? Because the answer to that question is, he will do whatever it takes to reach us. The question is merely this: what will my response be? Will I receive it, or will I reject it? Because remember these encouraging words, that God does any number of these things, and it's a sign that he loves you and that you're his kid. All the hope and joy and love and security comes with knowing that. Let's pray. God, thank you for loving us. Thank you for being a good father. Thank you for being a father who will break our chains, especially the chains we don't want you to break. Thank you. Thank you that you have a purpose and a plan, a mission, and you will carry it out. And what may look strange to us or like failure, it's just us not knowing all the details, but you do. So help us to trust you. And Lord, may we be ones that don't need to wait for you to drive our pigs into the water. May we be the ones that cast the pigs into the water ourselves. Ready for you to come and excited when you do. In Christ's name, amen. Hey, thanks for hanging out. Next week.